Yeah, but I
So,
think too that is the nature of design thinking and of study. You've got to learn when to stop,
yeah,
and when to just say enough is enough, because in anything in life, in business or in study, there's, you know, you've got to draw a line somewhere. So,
yeah.
hey,
It's been a
Mark.
lesson for me to kind of have to go sometimes, well, no, maybe you can't just, you know, get too involved in that. Just step back a little bit.
Well, and you know, there's lots of perfectionists, and it's your first course, so everybody, you know, you're all finding your way. You haven't got things to anchor yourselves with. Everybody's got a little bit of that voice in their head questioning, should I be here, or what if everybody else is smarter than me, and all of that sort of stuff. And that's actually part of the whole process that you have to actually move through in order to be able to have ideas and to deal with these things. So we're
Absolutely.
close to starting time. I've got a little poll that I want you to have a go at. So I'm going to put, I don't know if you can see the questions there. There are.
No.
Yeah, okay, so
No, can't see anything, Kath.
I'm going to work out how to make you see them. Oh, that's, I have to hit the button that says launch polling. That would give it away, wouldn't it? So I just thought we'd start with a bit of a recap from last time, and I'm going to ask Mark to lead a bit of a discussion for us. But the questions and that I've got here come out of some research that's been done by a woman called Lee Thompson out of Kellogg University. And at the end of the day, you know, again, I'll follow up with the right answers, but I'd like you to just think about these questions as we go, based on sort of what you learnt last time around and in last week, and just have a conversation about them. I don't mind if we just do them one by one. So what do you think? Are groups more creative than individuals?
I would say yes. There's more heads.
More heads? Interesting. What's Mark's at? Mark's got his hand up. Are you muted, Mark? Well, you're not muted, but you haven't got a microphone. Ha! We'll let him sort that out. Be interesting, because this is Mark's research area too, and his research is more recent than Thompson. So we'll see if we approach this in similar or different ways. What about the rest of you? What are you thinking? Anybody got a different view?
I'm thinking
I would say true.
maybe more individuals. I don't know. If you're worried about other people's reactions or not having the freedom to express yourself, then maybe as a group you could possibly be less open to expressing your ideas.
Absolutely. What are you saying, Mark?
Well, sorry, can you hear me now?
Without noticing, Mark. I haven't shown him this research.
Testing, 1, 2, testing. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me, good. I think the answer to that question is depends. I don't think it's a black and white, true or false answer, because I think it depends on the environment. It also depends on the individuals within that group. And I think it also depends on what your goals are.
Yeah, look, agree. I probably could have put a sit on the fence option, but I was typing in the poll before we started. So
it's my testimony to ambivalence. So that's.
So I'll give you a bit of background around the research. So the research was, and I haven't been fair to Mark because I haven't actually thrown this in his direction. In fact, I found this research cleaning up my study the other day because, and it comes out of a course that I did at Kellogg with Lee Thompson. couple of years ago, well, 2012, in fact. And so the research that she had done was looking over large groups that use traditional in a meeting, how do we come up with a good idea? And so her research showed that the answer to that is false, that if you want to get a good idea, that good ideas are more likely to have been generated by individuals than by groups. Which led on to that next question, though, about, well, how do you get, given that logic, I think it was Denise that said it early on, that more heads, what makes us think that one person is going to be smarter or cleverer or more creative than a group of people, when surely it's a multiplier effect, or at least an addition effect if we've got many people. And so that brings us on to that next question around, well, how do we make groups take advantage of that obvious addition of many heads? And so the research showed, in relation to the second question, that teams that follow rules or guidelines, that have some kind of structured approach to the way that they deal with problem solving, are definitely more creative than groups that just have no sets of rules. The research also showed, coming up to our next question.
So just on that, Kath, I think a good analogy of that is jazz musicians. I think we might have mentioned this last week, right? But
great analogy.
Yeah, I mean, great jazz musicians can improvise, but they still have structures and rhythms and melodies and keys that they have to play within. They have structures.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
And whilst you might have solo artists, actually they need that multiplier or that addition effect to have the right input. Although actually I was sick over the weekend, and I basically spent the whole weekend doing nothing over Easter than watching Modern Family episodes. And there was a great line in there about jazz where it's like, you know, so-and-so's playing the flute. Are they any good? Who knows? They play jazz. No one can tell. And I've been living off that ever since. So moving into that the third part of the research, so the question here was, people who brainstorm in a group and then brainstorm alone are more creative than people who brainstorm alone and then in a group. And so there was some conventional wisdom that if we work together and trigger some ideas and then go off and spend our time alone, that's how we'll get the best results. But the research actually shows the opposite of that. That if you spend a little bit of time working alone and really not being anchored or caught up in groupthink, and then you take all the work that you've done and have what we like to call the yes and conversations in a structured way, that the group itself can then leverage off those foundations that the individuals did. And that's the way that groups actually deal or create better. So this is an interesting one. Groups who work together in time and space are more creative than groups who work first independently and then together. What do we think about that? That's a particular issue for you guys, because at best you're working in the same time. As far as I'm aware, there aren't any groups that are physically getting together in the same room. But tell me if I'm wrong.
It's an interesting one, isn't it?
What do you think? This is a more fun way than giving you a paper to read, surely.
Mm.
So some of you are being very shy here. You do need to understand that there's no right, well, there is a right answer, but I can't tell who's doing it.
There's a right answer. There's a right answer in the research. Sorry, I was just telling. We're doing a master's degree, aren't we?
Yep.
Checking, because I mean, I think this is actually time where we start challenging research. And, you know, and I think it's important for you guys, you know, as you embark on your master's degree from this point forward is that you should start challenging some of the research that's out there and also some of the models that you're presented with. You know,
Absolutely.
You'll be going into organisations where you'll have HR departments, you know, teeing up, you know, Hernan-Brain assessments or Myers-Briggs assessments, and you're going to be wanting to know, well, what are we getting out of this? What's the science behind it? You know, start challenging some of those models. Is it going to fit the purpose of what we're doing here? So even some of this research that Kath's quoting here is like, well, yes, there's a right answer, but it's in the context of the research that was done. You know, so research projects are generally quite narrow in terms of the big wide world that we live in.
Absolutely. And yeah, and I'm going to apologise because, you know, I'm starting off with there's no right answer and then correcting myself. But actually, you know, really the point of this is not to get the right answer from you and for half of you on this to go away thinking, well, I got that right, and the other half to go away saying, oh, damn it, I have to try harder next time. The point of this is to have a conversation about how you're going to work creatively in a group, because this week is all about ideation and creating as many ideas as possible. But even more importantly, because this is just an assignment, more importantly is how are you going to meaningfully take the things that you're learning in this course into your work life? And how are you going to get the most out of the groups that report to you or that you're part of reporting to senior management? So the outcomes for this research was that actually groups who work together in time and space aren't more creative than groups who first work independently and then come together. Again, that's consistent with what we were talking about earlier. One of the issues, and I haven't looked yet, I know Mark's looked at a number of them, I haven't looked yet at the creative fears, but one that I suspect has come out is that concern that maybe my idea is a bad idea, or that other people might not like my idea, or I might feel judged. They're quite common creative fears. It's much easier to push those to the side if the beginning part of your ideation process you're doing by yourself. The other side, though, is what if people are often afraid, what if my idea isn't the best idea? What if my idea isn't the one that gets chosen? And actually, that's the fear that we kind of need to re-examine, because ultimately it doesn't matter whose idea is the best idea. The best ideas will ultimately evolve from conversation and from the work that you do together. And it might have sparked from you, it might have sparked from someone else. It will evolve over time. But unless you're all brave enough to start and put those ideas in, but then be brave enough to let go of them as well, to not be too fixed on what you think the outcome will be, then you're more likely to get good results.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. That's what we're here for.
We're going to a meeting having this idea that we're okay to fail. We can just say what we want and, like, you know, it's just an idea. But what about the other 3 or 4 people in that meeting who are just all about judging and who haven't had the education and who don't have that same creative bent and just think, well, you've got to come up to me with the best idea and it's going to be great. Otherwise, that's it.
I think it's an excellent question. Oh, Mark's itching to say something.
No, I agree. I think it's a fantastic question. And I think this is where we have cultural issues around creativity in organisations. We have different expectations and different ideas around creativity. I think we talked about it last week, is that there's no one, even in academic circles, there's no one agreed definition of what creativity is. So then how do we expect people to be creative when we don't even know what it is ourselves? Yeah.
But then I want to turn that right back around on you guys.
Back to me. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. But you're still going.
Yeah.
You can't like me to interrupt, please.
No, I was just going to say the issue with that is that if you don't have a culture that supports creativity and that idea that you can fail, then spout ideas, and that's where the rules and structures come in place with those meetings. So if you have an agreed set of rules and structures before you go into that meetings with everyone, then you can buy in and then have a greater productivity in terms of creativity and ideation. Sorry, over to you, Kath.
No.
If I can ask.
I'll come back to you in a second, because this is a point I get excited about, and I think this is the value in a course like this. The value is in actually planning for, well, how am I going to get the best and the most creativity out of my team? Recognizing that my team might be sitting in a much larger culture that I don't have any control over. And sometimes I think that's the benchmark for this week is not, I don't want you to come up with the best idea this week. What we want you to come up with this week is lots of ideas. And sometimes just being in a position where you're saying to your team, I don't care about the output at this stage. In fact, if we get too wedded to a solution now, then we're not going to be looking closely enough at other solutions. What we need now is a range of solutions that match our design brief, that meet those requirements, and that fit in the various boxes. The things that we do next week will be about analysing and bringing that back down to deciding which ideas to really test and prototype. But initially, if the first metric is lots, I want 100 ideas. Any fans of Mad Men here? You see, Don has his little creative meetings. You guys need to watch Mad Men. You clearly study too hard and don't watch enough television. But you know, the creative team, starts in the late 50s. It's in an advertising agency. It's a very dark show. But the main character runs a creative team in an advertising agency. And the number of times you hear him say, I want 20 ideas. It's like, I don't want the solution. I need 20 to talk about. And we'll go on to the reasons for having lots of ideas shortly. Imran, was that you who was trying to say something?
Yeah, what I was, this polls number 4 question, which we are kind of discussing. My understanding is what you have said earlier is more with the basis that there may be fear among, amongst those 4 fears or etc. So for that reason, it's the other way around. But in case that particular fear of be not judged, or if the team members don't have that fear, for example, if they have to be judged by the audience, etc. I would say the first one would work, which is the first part of the where the groups work in time and space. I personally, for example, with my work, I work with my colleagues in Spain and San Francisco, and I have found personally with my project experience that sometimes it's good that you're in the same time zone or kind of in the same level, time and space, and once you discuss those things, you can provide a solution to whatever problem you're working on. But when you're working independently, sometimes because there are certain guidelines are not available in which you sometimes create through discussions, you may not reach a solution so quickly. So I would tend to believe that's true.
Yeah, you've got a lot of competing situations in your scenario too. One of our colleagues at GSBL, I can't remember his surname. Do you know Stephen? Anyway, his PhD is literally about the impact of working across time zones on teams. And so he's looking at essentially how we talk and listen differently in the morning from how we talk and listen in the evening. And so that's fine if we're all in the evening and we're all in the morning. But when we're in different time zones, and I know this is something I experienced a lot in my working life, it's just you're sitting, you know, London, they never stay late. So it's always night for us and always morning for them. And I'm sitting at a computer screen with a glass of wine and, you know, they want to talk about the weather and the fog and I just want to, you know, go back and do something else. The other thing you're dealing with there too is multiple languages and cultures. You've got lots of different things that can be impacting the way that you talk to each other. So again, the rules and the expectations and the outputs, I would think, would become even more important. Interestingly, you're all going to challenge the research on the next one because the 5 people who've contributed don't think that there's a big difference between having lived abroad and travelled abroad. But Lee Thompson's research would suggest that actually that's not the case. Having spent time living in another country actually impacts your creativity. And I think that to me would be consistent with what we've learned about the value of empathy in really understanding a problem, and that visiting a place is never really the same as living in a place. But again, I can't give you, on that point, I can't give you any details at the moment about how deep that research was, and again, quite happy to challenge it. Then thinking about the counterfactuals, what might have been increases novel idea generation.
Mm.
I don't know why I picked that one off my list.
Could you expand on that statement a bit, Kath?
Well, I'm literally going straight from the quiz that she gave us, but basically thinking about what might have been, what might be different. To what extent does thinking about the opposite course impact your ability to generate ideas? So if this didn't happen, or if we weren't in this situation, or if somebody else did it.
I'm going for true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and basically it is. So that the more, and again, this is consistent, I think, with the work that you've been doing this last week, of the more different ways that you look at something, the number of different perspectives you take, the more information that you have. So
I just share a really, really quick little example.
Please.
I was in a project meeting last week, and the project manager and the project sponsor were in the meeting, and they said, right, what's the quickest way we can get to point A? And I said, not go there. Don't do it. And you'd be amazed at how that then spurred on, you know, how many different ways that we could get to point A, you know, rather than just focusing on one different thing. Because I just threw it out there straight away. Well, let's just not go there at all. And that then spurred on some additional conversation that wouldn't have necessarily happened.
yeah, I love that. I'm so using that next time.
Yeah.
I'm just going to find my slide pack. So, but before we get into a set of slides, which I'm clearly not ready to be in yet, there we go. Can you see them now? It's not actually at the beginning though, so let me just go back to the where. Oh goodness me! Just go back to where I need to be. No surprises in this slot. I just see if I can start again. Last week's activities. Anybody want to share any observations, thoughts, frustrations, compliments?
I can't remember off the top of my head who it was, but somebody submitted a rat's nest of hoses for the creative. I love that. I really enjoyed that, and it sort of pushed me back into when I first started this this semester I sort of only thought of design and creativity as aesthetics, and sort of seeing really creative, ugly creative problem solving to a lot of people have been in similar situations, I thought was really good.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it was really focusing on that idea of creativity as problem solving, isn't it?
Yeah, and I really enjoyed. I mean, I've gone through about half of the creative fears, but I've gone through all of the ones that have been submitted around what is creativity to me, and I was really impressed with, how much creativity is in our everyday lives. There were, from examples of people's children creating things to,
that was my favourite.
Yeah,
the
to
Lego.
See creativity in architecture and creative spaces, even just in images that people come across in their daily lives. I think that that's really important. Is that creativity is absolutely everywhere, and I think the important thing is that we are all creative, even if we don't think we are, and we all have creative talents. And then looking at at least half of the creative fears, like you said before, Kath, the two biggest, I guess, themes that came out of that was judgment. So fear of being judged. What if my ideas are no good? What if I'm not creative enough? And then the other one was fear of the unknown. So, I guess leading on from that was, I don't know where to start. What are the first steps to creativity? I don't know what it is. So therefore I'm not creative. I don't know where to go. I don't know where to start.
Mm.
So those two themes were certainly the strongest coming out of that. And I guess my advice for both of those, if it's the unknown, don't know where to start somewhere. Start small. Do it personally. You don't have to share your creativity with anyone to start off with. Just build, and your skills and your experience will build, and that just might be creative thinking. And there are plenty of creative thinking websites and activities that you can look up and Google. And in terms of judgment, really it's a mind shift in your own self to think, well, I don't care what other people think. My ideas are good and robust, and I have something to offer. And sort of, don't take it personally if someone does judge your ideas. I don't know if we shared the example of Marcel Duchamp's data example. No,
I don't think so. You're talking about
it's a bit hard to. It's a bit hard to without showing the image in context. But Marcel Duchamp in 1916 put a urinal in an art gallery. And he did that to invoke emotion and anger, and he was looking for an emotive response, because he was I guess an impressionist come cubist painter, and then wanted to do something different. And that's okay. And that movement created this whole movement of art around, it's called Dada, which led to punk rock music and led to Elvis and rock and roll, and all of that being different, challenging yourself to do something different, leads to great things. And it might not happen tomorrow or next week, but it can happen over decades.
Well, and one of the points that I'm hoping that I'll make tonight is that you can practice creativity, and that there's actually one simple ingredient to getting a good idea, and that's having enough ideas that one of them is a good idea. A creative mentor of mine, and I do a lot of legal work for creative people as well, and I sort of collect things they say along the way. I'm sure that this is stolen from someone else at some point, but so many of you will know the comedian Catherine Devaney, and she says, what other people think of you is none of your fucking business. It's like that's their business. Your job is to come up with the ideas. Now in business, sometimes your boss's idea of your end result is your business. You need to know that. You need to be working in that direction, obviously. But the thing is, the creative process is under the water. Your job is to come up with a solution. In order to get there, you need to manage the bits that support the top of that iceberg. And so that's what we really want to be doing this week. So even though this week there are no individual deliverables, the only deliverables for this week are group deliverables. In order for your group to be able to deliver, each member of the group is going to need to do some work by themselves. So let's just have a look at how that's going to work. Can you see the slide? For some reason, it really does not want to show you in slideshow view for some reason. I am not sure why. That's okay. We'll just make it big and hopefully you can see it. So this week, I want to talk a little bit about the What Wows process. I want to talk about the deliverables for this week and just hint a little bit at what's in the following week, because week 6 and 7 are at this What Wows stage. And our focus really will be on the ideation phase, on getting as many ideas as possible. I really need to find a way to show you this because it's not going to... Can you actually see the big yellow slide? Or now it should be what's on this week. Is it working?
We can only see the PowerPoint. Like, we can't see your actual slide show.
Oh, you can just see it in PowerPoint. Okay, sorry, I'm just going to fiddle around and just do that again to how to make this work.
It's better, but it's just exploded.
I am not sure why it just doesn't want to do it. Here we go. Try that. Does that work?
Not yet.
Nothing.
No, nothing on the screen.
Nothing. All right. I have too many things open on my computer, clearly. Let's just try again. Try. Share screen. How's that? Nope.
Nothing
You know
yet.
your vague face. All right.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Oh, there was
Was
something.
there? As soon as,
I think you have to
okay.
wait.
Too many pictures.
Just
I'll
slide along.
just go to the next one while. So, when you can see something,
Yes.
I'll let you know.
You can.
You can? All right.
Yes.
So, individuals, pressure's off. You still need to record in your journals, which at the end of the day will be helpful to you when you do your final essay. So you do need to do individual work, because if you don't come to your group meetings prepped, your group and you won't get the benefit out of the exercises this week and next week. Not so much this week, although at the end of the day, I want you to aim to have a lot of ideas this week. So it's more we're all about quantity this week. Next week, we'll use a number of different tools to help you identify what are the quality ideas. But for now, we just want lots. So this week, all about ideas. The one criteria against which you're going to have a look at them is your design briefs. And Mark and I will try and get through those in the next couple of days and give you some feedback as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
So this week about lots of ideas. Next week is about making sense of them. So I think I've said this already. There is only one secret to finding a good idea, and that is having lots and lots of ideas. It's interesting, the research here comes out of two different areas. One is DuPont, the company, that was able to essentially look back at where its production train came from and came up with a rough estimate that for every new product that it releases, it explores in the order of 3,000 different ideas. Interestingly, there is a guy called Stephen DuPont who does research in exactly this area. And I didn't actually realize that they overlapped until quite recently. So I'm now thinking back over years of just talking about DuPont, the company, and very worried that I've been misquoting Steve DuPont, the individual. So the one thing that we know for sure that is consistent across all organizations that come out with consistently good ideas is that they explore many, many ideas in order to get there. So that's the challenge for you this week, is for each group to come up with many ideas. So how do you do that? All the materials this week are really focused on different methods for gathering ideas and for spurring on your creativity. And so this week you're going to be asked or challenged to try a number of those different methodologies and reflect yourselves on the ones that you think are going to work for you. And you might like to try them with your own teams or in other circumstances as well and see what happens. So on the brainstorming page, you'll find a range of different approaches. And so this slide here and the next one are really aimed at trying to sort of gather different kinds of brainstorming tasks so that you can, or approaches, so you can think about really having a go at trying, if you're not going to try them all, try them from different categories, so you're trying different approaches. So the first group I would call brainstorming by bringing the right questions. There's a particularly powerful article, it's very brief, which is called The Secret Phrase That Innovators Use, which I would strongly recommend you have a look at. And couple that with the materials that come out of the D School at Stanford, and that's about asking how might we questions. And I'll come back to that in a minute. The most recent Harvard Business Review too has a fantastic article. The whole edition is actually focused on creativity and problem solving. So, and I hope you realize that you can access Harvard Business Review online through the RMIT library. And I'd strongly recommend that you actually just find the most recent edition and just have a flick through it, even if it's online. But the cover article for this edition is about brainstorming questions and really asks you to focus on, instead of trying to find out what the solutions are, focus first on what questions you should be asking. Because again, the famous quote from Einstein that I think we've mentioned many times, if I only had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes really understanding what the problem was, because once I really deeply understand what my problem is, it should only take 5 minutes to solve it. The next part, or the next section of brainstorming techniques that I'd like you to have a real focus on are ones that really ask you to draw on the insights that you've gained through your what is and what if examinations. So there's one that's been around since the beginning of time, I suspect, which the Scamper analysis, which I'll talk about in more detail in a minute. But you've already also done some journey mapping and some empathy mapping. And so your challenge there was to find the gaps, find the insights, find the problems. So drawing on those in your brainstorming sessions can really help you focus in to find the insights that matter. Looking for patterns. You've already done some mind mapping exercises where you've been looking at different patterns, organizing and reorganizing things in the same way. There's a technique called right braining and another one called break and build, both of which are described in the materials. But again, they're just 3 different approaches for looking for patterns and looking for ways to change the pattern to get a different outcome. And so the opposite of that is avoid patterns. Do exactly what Mark was doing in his example before. Instead of saying, how do we get to point A, really look at how do we avoid point A altogether? How do we go directly to Z? I love it when you come in, Lucas. Makes me feel good. And there's a couple of techniques that are described in the materials that help that. I'm a big fan of Brian Ego's oblique strategies. Have any of you come across those before? There's a couple of free apps you can get on your phone. There's a link on the website to one of them, but they're just basically random prompts to help you think about a problem differently. Brian Eno started using them when he was thinking about writing music. Where does it need to go? So, you know, can you make it darker? Can you make it shorter? Can you make it longer? Can you turn it upside down? Can you add a beat? Can you take something away? And I think you'll find, you know, the oblique strategies have gone much beyond music now, and I think you'll find them really interesting. Another one described in the materials is, this is the one my family uses quite a lot for solving problems. We call it the pessimist and optimist game, where literally half of you take the most negative point of view that you can. You're looking for as many problems as you can. And the other half take the most optimistic response to that. And really force yourself to come up with the best, brightest responses to all of those problems. Alternative worlds is also a really fun one to do. I've got a slide about that. But mashing up is a great idea too, and that really comes out of Scamper, which I'll talk about again, where put 2 opposite things together and think about how that might work. Like, how might you deal with this in a completely opposite way? Like, what would tagging be like if elderly residents were doing it? What would tagging look like in that environment? Throwing your ideas around to just really understand what the options are. So the how might we question, the reason that is such a powerful tool is because of the open nature of the question itself. So by asking how, you're exploring a range of options. You're not saying what is the solution, you're asking how the solution might come about. The use of might as well is a really important part of that setting up a question. It suggests it's a possible solution, not the only or the single solution. And the we itself is collaborative. It reminds us about the teamwork. It reminds us that we're working for a range of stakeholders. So I really strongly recommend that you read that short article, the secret phrase that top innovators use. I'd be surprised if it's 1,500 words long, and it's absolutely powerful way to think about framing questions. So, and then the D School expand on that idea and suggest a range of different ways of creating how might we questions. And I think the example that they use in their materials is often about selling ice cream. You'll find lots of different examples, but then they ask you to really focus when you're thinking about the question, how can you amp up the good parts of the experience? So actually, let's just do this a little bit on the fly, thinking about our tagging problem. What kind of how might we questions might amp up the good for taggers? Anybody want to suggest something just on the fly?
How might we get schools involved?
Yeah, well, so you're thinking about the education elements. So how might we include tagging in a school experience or an education experience? How might we bring the same kind of thrill that taggers get to another experience? How might we improve the experience of our streetscape by incorporating those students? Focusing on emotions, taking it to the extreme. I love exploring the opposite. I think it really helps us open, you know, how might we abolish street art altogether? By understanding what's involved with that, you'll have better insights into your problem and into your solution. Creating analogies, focusing on an element, all of these are different ways of really refining and focusing in on your question. So a challenge for each of you is looking at that set of categories on this slide here. Are you able to come up with a how might we question? And I would suggest that you read the materials properly before you do it. But are you able to bring a how might we question from each category into your next brainstorming meeting for your group? So if there are 3 of you in the meeting, could you have 3 questions that focus on amping up the good? 3 questions about taking it to an extreme. And then work together to try and answer some of those questions. One of the issues that often happens is that the client or the boss has a solution in mind already. And so part of the creative endeavour requires you either to limit yourself within the confines of the solution that they want, or to find a way to express the problem that allows for a solution that fits the problem, as opposed to trying to massage your problem to fit the solution that you have already committed to. And that's, I think, where the power of working in groups really is, that you can find ways to respectfully, as James Joyce would say, kill your babies, to understand that at this point somebody is too committed to a solution, and be able to pull back and make sure the solutions fit the problem, as opposed to defining your problem to fit your solution. So that's my challenge for you. Try and bring a problem from each category in, talk about where you got to the problems, and then start brainstorming in relation to those. So one of the tools that is often used, so this structured tool for brainstorming, is to use a matrix, something like this. So the creative matrix is often described as putting people solutions across the top and putting enabling solutions, so technologies, physical space, processes down the bottom, on the vertical axis, and then creating a grid and trying to solve for each. So let's say an enabling solution might be wearable technology, or heart rate monitors, or robot spies. Whatever it is that you might be thinking of is the kind of technology or the kind of physical solution. It might be changing the law. It might be paint that's incapable of being drawn on. Whatever your enabling solutions are down one side, and then across the top, you think about each of the different stakeholders. But I'm going to challenge you to throw some of your how might we questions in there as well. So let me use a completely different example, because I really don't want to anchor your thoughts in relation to your actual assignment. An assignment, a common assignment that we do in relation to design thinking has been looking at the changing nature of cinemas. So when people sit down and think about how attendance at cinemas is declining, and you do a little bit of work in your what if stage and your what is stage, you might pull together all of the things on a journey map that people don't like about the cinema. So probably not too hard to think. Most people have been to the cinema. The food's expensive. It's not particularly interesting. Other people talk too much. People are on their phones. You can list a whole lot of things that might be annoying about the cinema. So if you can turn those things into how might we questions. So how might we make eating at the cinema a gourmet experience? You might turn things around, look at the opposite. How might we make people talking to each other at the cinema an integral part of the experience? And then you can look at the technologies. So you can look at, well, Wi-Fi, or how might we, could you have real-time translation in a cinema? Could you have real-time people using their phones to tweet and comment on the film as it goes and have subtitles that are created by the audience? So by using your how might we questions and your various solutions, you can come up with different solutions in the grid. And the challenge then is to try and find a solution or an idea that fits each of the different requirements. Is that making sense? I feel like I'm throwing my hands around, and I suspect that when you get in there and have a go at doing it, it'll make a lot more sense to you. So SCAMPA is another one. It's been around for a very long time. And again, it's just really an acronym for different ways of thinking about solving a problem. So often used in product development. So the idea is, in looking at your problem, can you think of something that you could substitute, combine, adapt, modify, put to another use, eliminate, rearrange, or reverse? So let me give you some examples of where this kind of tool has been used. So substitution, for example, Spotify, Apple Music, any of the streaming music solutions are a substitution for the delivery mechanism for music. CDs substituted albums prior to that. And the album originally substituted or seeing a live performance or sitting around a piano and playing music. So it was a different way of achieving that same outcome. So thinking about what it is that your stakeholders do, what could you substitute? What could you change, either as a delivery mechanism or as an alternative for the behaviours that they're involved in? Combining, probably the best example I can think of would be of a really successful combination is the idea of the camera and the telephone. Very few people are walking around these days without a camera in their pockets, where 20 years ago, very few people even had mobile phones. They weren't walking around with their mobile phone in their pockets, or maybe 25 years ago now.
Hey, Kath, sorry, Kath.
Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I might pose a question if I can to the audience. What do you think is the most successful photography-based company in the world today?
Apple.
Apple.
Try again.
Imran here. I said Apple. I think someone else also said that.
Only
Don't wanna-
Facebook.
Yeah, what underneath?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I don't even have a Facebook account.
No, but when you strip it all back, Facebook is a photo repository.
Sorry.
That's how it started. It started as a photo repository. And it still is a photo repository today, much like Instagram. So, you know, it's one of the richest companies in the world, you know, just from the idea of the camera and the smartphone being pulled together.
And again, just keeping on coming back to, well, what's the problem that the customer or the stakeholder wants solved? Customers don't necessarily want a physical photo in their hand. What they want to do is be able to see an image of the person they love or the food that they ate, or
share that image. Yeah.
And to share that in some way. So really understanding what the customer wants leads to understanding what it is that can be delivered. So I might need to walk out and get some more water in just a second, otherwise I'm coughing all over you. I don't want you to get my disease.
Apparently Facebook is for oldies nowadays anyway.
Yeah, I think one question here, Mark,
Please.
Imran here. With the ideas of some of these social media platforms and the ideas, how they kind of evolved into what they are now, my point is that it's the so-called, say, substitute or combine didn't exist at the time of their inception when they started. So it you know, the customer need was not there for a particular solution they are giving these days. So those solutions or the needs also kind of evolve. You know, we don't need Facebook, for example, but we still use Facebook. So that may not be a need, but they have created such a product that we feel that, or we perceive that we need it, and so there's a feeling of that need as a customer. So it's an interesting thing. So in that way, my question is, some of the idea to substitute something which already existed and new doesn't hold water, because some of the solutions they have created, you know, some of these social media platforms were not really substituting anything. They are kind of unique.
I'm not trying to argue that there's no such thing as a new idea. I'm actually putting this forward as a way of thinking about how you might rethink about a problem or an existing product or an existing service in order to solve the problem. And I'm sure that there are very many unique features about social media. At the same time, there are many, you know, many old features too. It's, you know, it's a modern way of effectively creating a town crier, and looking at understanding what the actual need or requirement is for the end user helps us then explore different technologies or different ways of delivering that.
Yeah, I guess just to answer Imran's question is that, you know, social media, we weren't necessarily talking about social media as they're the platform that have really capitalized on this idea of combining a smartphone and a camera. And that whole idea that the social media platforms have co-evolved, much like Netflix has evolved as technology has become available to allow them to stream and produce content in a reasonable cost. Yeah, so technology is an enabler for those organisations, and this old idea of combining technologies together makes it easier for them to exist and be very successful.
Yeah,
I think also, Imran, even though there's new technologies or new offerings on the market, even though we didn't know we wanted it, it's also about desire for it, and just wanting what everybody else has got. So it's just the marketing and just capturing, I think, what people didn't know they wanted, but now you want it.
Yeah, I with some of the comments just after me, I would say it when you reflect, it is something once those technologies are developed, you see further, and then you can have more creativity, you know, because now like what Newton said, that on the shoulders of the previous, you see further. So it's that kind of thing that once you reach that point, then you see far ahead.
Yeah, I think that's right. A couple of others here. I think some of them, technologies adapt too. Technologies help us adapt and think about something in a different way. And being, just the evolution, when you think that it's not actually all that long ago that the telephone was invented, the idea that we could then go to a wireless telephone and then to a mobile telephone, this is just an evolutionary approach. Adding a feature, I always use, I don't know how many of you are fans of audiobooks or online books. As you can probably tell from my bookshelf, I'm a fan of actual books, but I probably haven't bought a physical book now for 3 or 4 years. I buy pretty much all of my books online because I can carry them wherever I go. I can be reading 3 or 4 things on the go. But one of the things that really pulled me over the line to go from a traditional book reader to an ebook reader was Amazon's WhisperSync. So I can have an audiobook, and as I'm walking my dog or walking down to the station, I can be listening to it in my headphones. And then when I get to the train, because reading at the end of the day is quicker than listening, I can just hit the button and go to read, and it syncs. It knows where in the page and where in the book I'm up to. So it's added or magnified the experience, because at the end of the day, when I bought books, I didn't really want a book. What I wanted was the story or the information. And in fact, by giving it to me, particularly I read a lot of fiction, but by giving it to me with an actor's voice as well, that expands the experience for me. My favorite example here is for putting something to another use is Viagra. Viagra, as many of you will know, is a failed blood pressure medication. It had what some might have thought was an unfortunate side effect, and it really has, that side effect itself has meant a blockbuster for its creators. Often it's taking things away that is a really incremental part of a creative solution. The Sony Walkman is famous for that decision, instead of having something enormous, to be able to make it smaller and to provide a mobile listening experience. And I'm sure there's many things that you can think of where it's actually in the paring down and the simplicity and the removal of features that the real genius in the product has evolved. And we particularly see this with the rollout of software, where the freemium model, where free products will have limited functionality, and if you really want the rest of the product, then you pay for more. But actually the product that you've downloaded on your computer or that you're using online, all of the software is there, just some of the features are turned off. And in fact, to deliver freemium models, the developers need to do more work to turn things off. So I find that really interesting. Rearranging or reversing things. So his name escapes me and I can't see my notes at the moment, but one of the CEOs of General Motors, his big innovation was to work out ways to finance the product, to involve, so instead of the customer coming in with their car loan already organised and then picking the car, he rearranged that process so that you could come to the dealership, choose your car, possibly get upsold, and then sell the finance package at the same time. So I think this is a really useful acronym. It's a really good way of just when you need, if you're running out of ideas particularly, think about how might I substitute one of the elements in this problem or in the existing journey. How might I combine some of the elements or combine it with something differently? Think about these as triggers for again, getting lots of ideas. And the old world scenario is really good fun as well. And often it can be just a really good way of just getting lots of ideas down. I think it often works best in silence. You can use, these are the ones that are on the page that I wrote for the materials in Canvas, but you can really pick anything that you like. But just spend 5 minutes thinking, what would Richard Branson do in this scenario? What would Kim Jong-un do? What would a kindergarten kid do? What would your mother do? What would a Roman emperor do? What would Starbucks do? What would Elon Musk do? Putting yourself into another character, particularly for people who are worried that they're not creative enough. You are creative enough, but adopt a different character. Be one of your personas, or be one of these famous people that you know, and think about what they might do. I'm also a big fan of what we call a creative production line. So, and often that's as simple as starting with a piece of paper in a room, but you're going to have to do it virtually. Just writing the beginning of an idea or drawing a picture and then sending it on to the next person. In the classroom, what I do with this is I get people to write for a minute or two, and they just have to stop at the point that they stop. And then they have to fold the paper up into a paper plane and shoot it across the room. And you need to catch a paper plane, and then you need to add to the idea. Yes, and another paper plane, shoot it across the room, keep building on each other's ideas and creating a kind of production line for getting as many ideas as you can. So lots of different brainstorming techniques to come up with lots of ideas, and I really would like to see each group try and get 100 different ideas if they can. A couple of important things to think about. You really have to avoid starting with a solution, because if you've got a solution in mind already, it's going to limit the number of ideas you can come up with. You'll be coming up with ways to implement your solution as opposed to ideas of different solutions. And it's great. If you've got a solution already, that's fabulous. But that means you've got one solution already. I want to challenge you to come up with 99 others. Some of them might be ridiculous, but you can do it. You will want to keep going back to your design brief from time to time. That will help you keep on track. Part of the creative process requires you to do your homework. Beautiful quote here from Alice in Wonderland. If you don't know where you're going, any road can take you there. What we're looking for here is 100 of those yellow bricks on your yellow brick road that's taking you to Oz. And Oz is what your design brief says that it is. So the work that you did in the what is and the what if stages will help you here as well. And often this is about getting those specific questions right. Not questions like how we need to improve sales but a specific kind of Oz or goal, which is we need to improve sales of horses by 20% in a period of time. What will be involved in doing that? You also need to create a safe space. Groups appear to be working with various levels of success at the moment. In the last week or two, a number of people have dropped out as well as they've approached the census date. We're a much smaller group now. And so now is the time, particularly if your group hasn't been working well, to get past it and to work out where you're going to move forward. You're not in the same physical space. Well, most of you won't be, I don't think. So you need to really go back and address your rules and your own group culture for how you're going to deal with disagreement and what your minimum standards of conduct are. So if you need some help with that, and frankly, I don't think you should, we're all grown-ups, but if there's anything that we can do to mediate along the way, then just call out for that. but it is really important to create a safe space for everybody. And this is what you need to do in the real world as well. You need to think about the ways that you ask for ideas. I think of it the way that we think about, for those of us who are parents, when we started having toddlers and we had to think about how do we talk to these small people in our lives in a way that they're going to listen to us, and how do we listen to them in a way that they're going to talk to us. And at the end of the day, that's pretty much every parent's dream, isn't it? To have our kids listen to us and to have our kids talk to us. And we're, as the adults, the ones who can manipulate that. And surprise, surprise, in business, that's what we can do as well. We need to find ways to talk so that people will listen to us, and ways to listen so that we will extract the best ideas. Ultimately, what you do with the ideas will matter. And you need to be cautious not to allow the highest paid person in the office or the person with the biggest personality to take over, which means you also need to be comfortable with the silences. You need to give other people room to speak. I might be speaking to myself here, being the one who talks over everybody. But, and equally, you need to reward some silliness and then reward the structure as well. So set yourself a goal of, we're going to get an idea in every one of these boxes in the matrix, and reward, praise the person who has the biggest breadth of ideas. Praise and reward the people who keep you honest when it comes to the design brief as well. This slide, I'm not going to go through each of these. I'm just going to give you the pack. Basically, sometimes we need triggers. So there are lots of different ways and different tools that you'll find in the materials that will help you do that. And sometimes it might just help to just randomly throw a dart at your screen and pick one of these things. So some of them are things that you'll need to do yourself. One of the things that we often explore when we do this as an intensive is, how do you keep hold of those ideas that you have in the middle of the night or that you have in the shower? And the only way you can do it is to write your ideas down, even if they don't make sense, and you can build on them. We have ideas all the time. Sometimes we just have to remind ourselves that we have them by writing them down. There are things that you can do to exercise your creative muscles. Even things like going to work a different way, taking a new route, trying to draw your notes rather than writing them down. Write your cover story. This is one I particularly love. Imagine that there's a magazine, and the magazine is basically highlighting this fabulous idea that your team has put together. What would the cover story look like? What would the picture on the front page be? What would the headline be? Imagine out into the future that way, and that might inspire what you're doing. Making it, and then there's the 1% things. How could you make this idea 1% better? So a lot of different ideas to think about there. I'm gone over time again. So happy to talk about any of those. For next week we'll take your ideas, and you've got the materials there already if you want to move ahead, but you'll start thinking about them and organising them in different ways so that you can get the best ideas to move into your napkin pitch and your prototyping stage. For now, there's a couple of things that you can do yourself with getting some broad buckets together. Identify your low-hanging fruit, the no-brainer ideas that you should do straight away. Identify the ideas that are safe, that anybody, including competitors, might come up with. Identify which are the crazy ones, the ones that are too crazy, particularly for your own organisation, or they're out of step with your brand. I'm hoping that there are no ideas that are too crazy for your CLN, but you might like, if you've got a really big, crazy idea, you might want to couple it with a safe idea as well, so that you can talk to your CLN in a way that your CLN is going to listen to you. Thinking about edgy ideas as well, the ones that are in line with the brand that your organisation has, but they still get you really excited. And then the BHAGs, the big, hairy, audacious goals or ideas that would be likely to die due to a budget concern or the complexity of implementing them based on the available resources. Identify them, but they might be the ones that you can pare down or that you can combine with something else. So just categorising them at this stage is a really good start. So that's all I really wanted to say. I did want to remind you to do my little survey. Only 2 of you have done it so far. Those 2 people have been very, very complimentary of us, which is lovely, and I do appreciate it. But at the end of the day, what I'm doing is we're looking for ways so we can do this better. So this is a customer co-creation here. It's a learning launch, and so constructive feedback really helps. The one piece of feedback that I will definitely be acting on that's come through is that there needs to be some qualitative feedback in that first 4 weeks. And I think that makes a lot of sense. The journal task was kind of supposed to be that, and it didn't work out that way. And I really want to change that around. But really, I'm very keen to hear from you, and I'm sure Mark is too, about how we can make this work, because we're all in it together. And that's, sorry, I raced a little bit there at the end, but questions, concerns, comments, thoughts? You're all exhausted. Well, have a good week, people. And yeah, we'll get back to you with some feedback on your design briefs over the next couple of days.